Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel, Conversations with Rudy Rivera. Tonight, I am really thrilled to have Dr. Irena Yashin-Shaw, who is I think, the world's foremost expert on entrepreneurs. Please, if you like the channel, please click subscribe because there'll be many more videos like this. Dr. Shaw, thank you so much for joining. Can you give my audience a little bit of background on where you are? And the theme of today's topic is entrepreneurs. Who are they?
I can do that, Rudy. First of all, let me say thank you so much for having me on your show. I think it's very exciting, and congratulations for getting that off the ground and reaching a global audience. I think that's wonderful. Well done. So a little bit of background about me. You might have gathered from my accent, I hail from Australia. I live in Brisbane, and it's an interesting time of the year now. We're in spring, so it's beautiful with lots of rainfall and sunshine. So great part of the world. So my background is in education. So I started my life as a high school teacher, and then I just had this incredible passion for just really finding out everything I could about how to be a really wonderful, impactful, difference-making educator. So that led me on to doing a PhD. Well, I did a master's in education, then I did a PhD in creative problem solving, went on to teach at university, and then about 15 years ago, left academia to start my own business. And it was in the area of creativity and innovation. And now that has evolved into really bringing the message of intrapreneurialism to the world, because intrapreneurs are the human face of innovation. So that's my background in a nutshell and what's brought me to this place.
I, it's a definition I've not known until just recently, and I noticed that this really is a rather young discipline because it started, I believe, in 1978. Then
Yes.
it went on 1985, and I think the first conference on entrepreneurship was in London, wasn't it?
Well, you're absolutely right about the fact that it's a relatively young discipline, and I'd like to pay homage to the person who coined the term intrapreneur, and that was Gifford Pinchot III. He wrote a paper in 78 with his wife Libba, and then a book in 85. And it's been a really interesting term that has been in the background for a few decades, as you've alluded to, that has only really recently started to get a lot more attention and a lot more traction. So although there have been really interesting papers written about it, and there have been people who've been talking about entrepreneurialism for decades, it seems like the last few years, and in particular since COVID, that the notion of intrapreneurialism has really exploded. And the recognition of how important intrapreneurs are to organizations because of the disruption that we've experienced through COVID is something that's really is really getting a lot of traction right now. So I'm actually thinking, Rudy, it might be prudent for me to backtrack a little bit, and before I start talking about entrepreneurs in more detail, maybe define what it is. Let's
Exactly.
go. What is an intrapreneur, and what do they look like, and what do they sound like, and maybe throwing out the challenge to the people who are watching your wonderful YouTube channel here to say, are you an entrepreneur? Would you like to be? So let me just backtrack. So the prefix intra means inside. So we all know what an entrepreneur is, someone who goes and starts a new business. They've got an idea that they think will change the world, so they go and begin a new venture. Whereas an intrapreneur is someone who thinks and acts like an entrepreneur, like they've got that entrepreneurial spirit and mindset, but they don't leave to start their own venture. They stay within their context, whether that would be a corporation or a small business or a government department or virtually any institution. They stay inside that institution, that organization, and they bring their enterprising talent to bear on the problems that need to be solved internally within the organization. So hence intrapreneurs are people who think and act like entrepreneurs while still working inside their organizations. So that's probably the most fundamental definition. It's the one that you would hear most often. And historically, it has been applied to people who literally start up ventures internally within an organization, and they have startups, or they start a new revenue stream, or they have a business inside the large organization. I'm actually expanding that definition, and I believe that it is in alignment with what Gifford Pinchot III, who was the father, or is the father of entrepreneurialism, it's in alignment with his thinking, which is that intrapreneurs can be in any role within the organization. So rather than only being part of, say, an organization's intrapreneurship program, which is wonderful, and that there's certainly definition of an intrapreneur, someone who is in the entrepreneurship program, and a number of big companies have dedicated programs about sourcing ideas and then sifting them through, seeing which of the ideas that they want to progress with, and then giving people permission to come out of their existing roles to progress those ideas and maybe test them and potentially start a whole new revenue stream with a new product for the organization. And that's a wonderful example of entrepreneurialism. But I actually expand that definition to say, really, it's anyone in any role within any layer within the organization who can think and act like an entrepreneur inside their organization. So basically, if you look around your workplace and you see an issue that is causing difficulties, or is frustrating people, or is not giving customers the kind of experience that your organization would like them to have, and you go, actually, I think I can fix that, or I know a solution for that, then you're being intrapreneurial. So it's literally anyone who can find opportunities for creating value and then actually taking action to progress those opportunities and bringing them to fruition is an intrapreneur. So it's a broad definition.
Well, I think it should be broad because at first blush, people think the entrepreneur is somebody who's in a management position in their company, somebody who has authority, but it could be anywhere from the person working the steno pool, the secretary, the person who works security at the door of your office. I have a client who's retiring now from a job where she started as a secretary 42 years ago, and she actually has a patent to her name. The company owns it, but that was part of her entrepreneurial spirit. She saw a need, she met it. Of course, she had the help of the company. What are the characteristics of entrepreneurial people? In my mind, it's they fill the premise with the drive to learn. That's one of, to me, the most important thing, and they never stop learning. What
Yep.
do you see as some of the other characteristics?
Absolutely. So thank you for reinforcing that idea about the fact that entrepreneurs can be at any layer. They don't have to be in the official leadership positions. They don't need to have the title behind them. So that's a very important distinction. And entrepreneurialism can be the responsibility of everyone within the organization, not just the people who are in the innovation team or part of the entrepreneurship program. And I love that example that you just gave about one of your clients who's been with a company for 42 years and has a patent. That is exactly what we're talking about here. Started as the secretary, so that's perfect. So what you just said about the fact that intrapreneurs are learners That's definitely one of the characteristics of intrapreneurs. They have a number of them, but seeing as you've raised the issue of learning, that let's talk about that. So intrapreneurs are great at spotting opportunities and then also progressing those opportunities. Now, chances are, in order to progress that opportunity, they're going to have to learn something new. And to be learning agile, in other words, taking the attitude of whatever it is, I can learn what I need to when I need to so that I can do what I need to. That is learning agility. It's the opposite of that mindset that says, oh, that's not my job, or I wasn't trained in that, or that's outside of my discipline, or no, I'd have to go and do a course on that in order to be able to progress that particular piece of work. No, intrapreneurs go, whatever I need to learn, I can learn. And I think in a world that is changing so fast, that is, the pace of change is constantly accelerating, we all need to have that sense of self-efficacy around our capacity to learn what we need to when we need to. So that you've identified it perfectly, Rudy, that being a lifelong learner, being an agile learner is really at the core of successful intrapreneurs.
Well, and they look for satisfaction more than monetary rewards. They just have to keep their creative juices flowing. They don't necessarily think, I'm going to do this and I'm going to get paid a lot of money. They're just going to do it because they want to go. And hopefully the company will recognize them and provide some type of remuneration or recognition. But that to me seems to be another characteristics of an entrepreneur.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that too. Thank you for being so well informed about entrepreneurialism, because it still is a relatively new term, and people still do say to me, do you mean entrepreneur? And I go, no, intrapreneur. And sometimes if they see it written, they think it's a spelling mistake. So I'm glad that you've really embraced this whole concept. The notion of being passionate about what you do is also fundamentally at the core of intrapreneurs. Now, the what you've just raised is actually quite a complex conversation, because sure, intrapreneurs do this because they are passionate about just making a positive difference in the world. And one would like to think that their organizations will value them and their contribution. However, I have heard of instances where intrapreneurs have unfortunately been exploited, and their ideas have been, for want of a better word, misappropriated, and someone else has gotten the credit for it, sometimes the manager. And so it doesn't always have a happy ending. And when that happens, often you'll find that the entrepreneur will leave and go and work somewhere else where they are more valued. However, let's take the positive aspect, and where that doesn't happen. It's true that entrepreneurs are driven by this kind of internal, intrinsic motivation for wanting to make things better. And there is a lot of research to show that monetary incentives aren't always the most effective when it comes to motivating people to be entrepreneurial. Now, that said, we do need to acknowledge that people that only applies if people are comfortable with their pay grade. Like if
Exactly.
they are starving and they don't have funds, or they are not able to look after themselves, then monetary incentives have much more impact. But let's just assume that they've got a good job, they've got a fair and decent pay scale. Then what happens is that what motivates them more is the passion and the desire to create value. And that's because there is an intrinsic reward that comes from making things better. Being able to sit back and say, I did that, or I'm responsible for this improvement in people's lives. That's an enormous motivation for people. And the other thing is that there's also some really interesting research that says that when we solve a problem successfully, our brains get a little hit of dopamine, which is the feel-good hormone, and it actually gives us a bit of a buzz, a bit of a high.
The adrenaline,
Yeah,
like
it
a lawyer
does.
winning a case. Oh my God, I won. Yes, I won.
Yes, exactly. So, you're on a high from that. And so people who are constantly solving problems and making things better, they actually do experience that sense of achievement, which can be quite addictive. You just want to keep doing it. So just back to your point about the fact that they're often driven by their passion, it's very true that is often the most motivating factor, just that satisfaction of being able to see
Sure.
that they've made a positive difference.
I also view entrepreneurs as people who volunteer. And I'll give you an example. They'll volunteer for anything. I had a colleague at work who thought he got a demotion. I said to him, I don't think so. I think they're probably projecting you for something else. But I said, go talk to the general counsel, the GC, and just say to him, I really love working for the company. And whatever you need me to do, I will do. And within 6 months, he was promoted to a commercial underwriter. But you have to communicate that. So you can't just sit in the silo. I think you have to volunteer also. And that involves, in my personal opinion, networking within your own company.
Yes,
I think people love people who volunteer. They may say no, but at some point, your CEO, your manager is going to remember you and say, "Hey, let's talk to Fred. He's always volunteering for something. Fred, will you take this project on?"
yes, yes, yes. Oh, that's another wonderful example from your workplace there, Rudy. Um, Intrapreneurs, because they spot opportunities to make things better and are happy to operate in a space that's outside of their own immediate, say, job description, when they volunteer for those kinds of projects that might be outside of their immediate role, what they're really doing in a way is actually what we'll call job crafting. So I don't know if you've come across that term, but it's where people begin to find opportunities to evolve their existing positions into spaces which might be adjacent to the work they're already doing, but really lights them up, where they really enjoy working on those other kinds of projects. And so over time, what they're really doing is carving out their own space for themselves and for what they want to bring to the organization. They're literally carving that space out for themselves to move into. And you're absolutely right too about the fact that you need to come to the attention of people. So intrapreneurs are often well networked, so they collaborate with other people internally within their organization. They talk to people, they initiate conversations. As you say, they come to the attention in a positive way to the leadership because they volunteer for things. And I think that's part of what drives intrapreneurs. They've got that pot of energy that they draw on in order to look for ways that they can add value which might be beyond their immediate roles. That's how you end up with a very interesting career trajectory. And entrepreneurs often do have quite shall we say non-traditional career trajectories, that they might start in a particular discipline, but in the old days where you joined a company after graduation from university, and then you would be with the company for your entire working life, just working your way up through the ranks. That model is less and less relevant in this very VUCA world that we live in. And so people are finding very non-traditional, fluid, flexible paths to evolve their career trajectories. And entrepreneurs are very good at that.
I also think an entrepreneur is also less likely to get laid off or terminated when there's a crisis. When you look at the crisis in 2008, where companies were not just letting some people go, letting good people go, the people who I think expressed the most talent, the most drive, were probably the ones who stayed. Uh, so I
Yes.
think it really represents more job security. A former client of mine is the president of a small company in the UK, and I asked him, "Tell me about your success. Why are you so successful?" He said, "Rudy, everyone I hire they have to want my job. If they don't want my job, they're just people who are happy and content. So you really have to want your boss's job. And another friend of mine who's a GC for a huge bank in Canada who has 600 employees says, Rudy, they're either moving up or out. We want people to constantly innovate. But the company has to provide the background for that. The company has to provide the resources to do it. And you have an excellent example in your book about a government worker who learned how to use SharePoint,
Yeah,
met with people, did it solve a problem that IT people said it'd take $100,000 in 2 years
yep,
to solve.
yep. It's the opening story in my book, Rudy. Thank you very much for making mention of it and directing attention to my book, which is available on my website. You can see my very well worn copy here that's fully dog-eared and bookmarked. So I just mentioned that now, and then I'll come back to talking about the point that you just raised. So if you just Google Intrapreneur, it will potentially take you to my website. Otherwise, it's intrapreneur.com.au, and you can purchase my book from my website. And it's full of lots of real life examples of people who have been intrapreneuring within their organizations. And the story that you just referred to is the opening story, but there are so many stories all the way through, really drawn from the various courses that I've run. So I have a program that goes for either 3 months or 6 months, and people who come through those programs actually have to progress some sort of intrapreneurial initiative. And they grow their confidence as they move through these experiences, and so that the next time around they can do something bigger and more ambitious. So becoming an entrepreneur is a journey. So the story that you're just referring to, of a government worker, we'll call her Jane, not really her name. She came in as a manager for workforce capability in a small government department. And the first thing she did was look around to say, well, what are all of the things that we need to update? And the onboarding process within her government department was ancient. It was really archaic. It just consisted of hundreds of PowerPoint slides that people had to work through, and there was no way of telling whether people had even been able to read them all or whether they'd finished them, and it was so boring anyway. So she said, okay, we're going to bring this whole process into the 21st century. We're going to put it online. They use a platform called SharePoint in their government department. She said, we're going to create it on that. We're going to have it interactive. We're going to update it. We're going to have it so that we can change the information at a moment's notice if people go on leave, and we know who's backfilling in their roles, all of that. So she went off to IT to say, let's do this. And she wasn't expecting any pushback because it was really overdue and everyone agreed that it was. And IT said, yeah, great idea. All you need to do is write a really detailed business case, wait 2 years, and have a budget of $100,000. Now, some people who worked in government might have said, oh, okay, that's just what I have to do because that's bureaucracy, that's government. And they would have gone away and spent days writing a business case, etc. But she was not part of that kind of government employee. She said, no, if they can't do it for that, I'm going to do it myself. And it comes back to that concept that you raised just a little while ago, Rudy, about being a learner. So she literally taught herself with one of her teammates how to use SharePoint and how to set up a platform and a space on SharePoint. So instead of spending $100,000, she bought a $10 Udemy course, and she bought a $25 book called SharePoint for Dummies, something like that, and watched lots of YouTube videos. And she and her team member literally spent over a couple of weeks a few hours here and there when they could around their busy schedules, holed up in a meeting room, watching the YouTube videos and then building the site, and then going back and doing a bit of the course and then continuing to build the site. And within about 2 or 3 weeks, they had a minimum viable product. They had some sort of a platform that they could then share with the rest of the organization to say, this is now the beginning of our new induction process. Unbelievable. And she did it herself. And that was because she trusted herself to learn what she needed to, when she needed to, in order to be able to do something. That was important, and that really created and added value for her organization. Now, to come back to your original point that you just said about how intrapreneurs, especially in times of disruption, are the most valuable of all employees, this really speaks to that. Because when you've got someone working in your organization who can spot opportunities, who can learn what they need to in order to make them a reality, who are prepared to put their blood, sweat, and tears into something to create value, then you'd have to be crazy to let them go. You know, wouldn't that be the most valuable of all employees? And so I do think that intrapreneurs, as they begin to develop their professional reputation, their professional branding as an intrapreneur, will inevitably be the most valuable of all employees.
They tend to be the more valuable. I teach international law at Washington University. I've taught it online for Zoom. So I became a Zoom master before the pandemic hit. And after listening to your lecture, I realized that all my students are entrepreneurs because many of them are not lawyers, but they're taking this Master's of Law degree at a law school, a very prestigious law school, Washington University, St. Louis, so that they can be better at their work. They're in banking, but they need to know about compliance. They work with their contracts department. They need to understand how the law of contracts work. Not because they want to be practicing attorneys, but they want to learn. So that was a realization I came to. In fact, I taught two
Yeah,
classes yesterday morning, and that yes, they're all entrepreneurs. In
I
your book,
love that. I
in your
love
book,
that.
you also cite out another success story with PlayStation.
Yeah, yeah.
A person, yeah, trying to figure his daughter's Nintendo how to make it more powerful, and
Yep. Let me just come back to that, because I just want to pick up on something that you just said about your students who are taking this course on international law, even though they are not lawyers, but they're in another area and are upskilling themselves in an area that's really quite outside their original discipline. Now, this is a really interesting concept, and I think it's going to become increasingly important for people to begin to develop their skill sets outside of their immediate discipline. So whatever
exactly.
they might have gone to university to study finance or accounting, but now they're training themselves and upskilling themselves in law and potentially other disciplines as well. Now, this is the notion of polymathy. I don't know if you've come across the term
No, I
being
haven't.
a polymath. And I think the world is going to be, just as it is increasing its demand for intrapreneurs, it's also increasing its demand for polymaths. So once again, the prefix poly means many or multi, and the term math from the Greek means knowledge. So a polymath is someone who has skills and expertise, at least some expertise in multiple areas of knowledge. So that makes sense, doesn't it? A polymath. And the reason why it's going to become increasingly important is because the world is becoming increasingly complex. And so having a rigid approach to problem solving, having just, this is how we do it because we're engineers, or this is how we do it because we're finance people, or because we're lawyers, is going to be increasingly outdated. And people are going to need to start developing their skills in a whole array of different disciplines so that they can be better problem solvers. And this encourages the notion of cognitive flexibility, which also serves people well in a complex world where we need to be highly adaptable. But if you think about someone who's got expertise or at least a nodding acquaintance with multiple fields of study, well, they've got so much more capacity, if you like, or vocabulary from which they can draw in order to solve complex and difficult problems. So I think this notion of upskilling ourselves in different areas is very, very clever for people who are doing it now. And I think we're going to see more and more of that as the world becomes increasingly complex. We're going to be demanding polymathy and rewarding polymaths.
I knew what a polyglot was, a person who spoke multiple languages.
Yeah.
But this isn't just one course, Dr. Shaw. This is a whole master's degree program that takes them 3 years to complete while they're doing their day job. It takes a lot. It's a lot of determination. So I think another myth about entrepreneurs is that they kind of tend to do it themselves, but many of them work with a team and build a team around for the simple reason that you cannot have knowledge of everything. So it's important that you network and bring people into the fray where you're contributing, he's contributing, she's contributing, and you come to the solution. But as the entrepreneur, you have to basically be the leader. So I think leadership is another quality of being an entrepreneur.
Yes, yeah, and the point that I made earlier about the fact that entrepreneurs come from all levels of the organization, not necessarily from the executive leadership level, it is true that because of their capacity to rally people to their cause, they really act like leaders because they're thinking about how to make the organization better. They're rallying people to the cause, and they are progressing projects that are going to improve the prospects for the organization, help it to be more future ready, etc. They are acting and thinking like leaders. So your notion about being able to bring other people on board is really a very important one, because no matter how much of a polymath someone is, chances are they're going to need some help. If they're progressing some kind of an initiative within the organization, they are going to need to draw on the skills, the perspectives, the resources of people in other parts of the department or the organization to help them get the best possible outcome they can. And the other thing around that is too that if we acknowledge that we bring multiple perspectives from other people as we're solving a problem, then we're much more likely to get a genuinely innovative outcome. Because there's so much research that shows that people who are part of diverse teams, rather than teams of experts that have expertise all in the same area, get much better outcomes. And the reason for that is because you've got multiple sets of eyes on the same issue. You've got people bringing different perspectives to bear on the same issue. So this notion of being a leader in order to help people to collaborate around how to problem solve, very important, very important.
Well, I also think that these people need to know how to communicate and need to learn how to communicate, need to learn how to connect in order to bring those people on board. That's always an issue. Let's talk a little bit about some of the failures, because a number of Fortune 500 companies that were in existence 20 years ago, for example, no longer exist. Blockbuster, BlackBerry. In fact, you mentioned in your book that when the iPhone came out, the BlackBerry CEO said, "Oh, that's just a passing fad," and look what happened.
Yep.
How does it affect it?
Such another good point. And there's, in this fast-moving world, Rudy, hubris and arrogance and a sense of complacency is the death knell. So,
I think
it's
so.
really
Yes.
dangerous. It's dangerous. Like what you've just said about organizations that were complacent about their market positioning. They said, "Oh, we're the best in the world. So as long as we're the best in the world, whatever we offer is going to be in demand." is not accounting for the fact that the world is changing really quickly. And yes, indeed, 75 years ago, the average lifespan of an organization was about 50 years. In now, well, certainly in 2015, it's probably even shorter now. It had reduced to about 12 to 15 years. And as we go through a world that's moving even faster, that lifespan could reduce further. So the message is that we just cannot be complacent, no matter how successful we might have been in the past. That's not a guarantee of success in the future. I mean, probably the greatest example, that's almost like the poster child for this sort of complacency, which ended in failure, was the famous example of Kodak, which many of your viewers and listeners are probably familiar with. That wonderful story that gives so many people so much ammunition to talk about the dangers of complacency, where Kodak actually invented the digital camera. So they had an intrapreneur within their ranks who came up with this incredible, like, groundbreaking, paradigm-shifting product that they put a patent on and then just put it on the back shelf, because they took the approach, well, we're the best in the world at print photography, and there'll always be a market for us. They just did not account for the fact that if you can be the best in the world, but if the world no longer wants it, what it is that you're the best in, then you're in trouble. And so, we hear the story about how Kodak went from being market leaders and being in business for over 100 years and employing tens of thousands of people globally to, filing for bankruptcy in 2012. It's sad, but by the same token, it's also difficult and perhaps not entirely fair to sit in judgment from the vantage point of down the track, because we're always have 20/20 vision in hindsight, So, at that time, it might have looked like the organization would have been sacrificing their core business, and then, literally cannibalizing their revenue if they then started this whole new product. But now, 20, 30 years down the track, organizations are recognizing the importance of actually doing both of those things simultaneously. So maintaining your core business, maintaining your revenue streams, while at the same time being able to invest in the future. And so invest in ideas and products that may not give a return immediately, but could potentially do so in a couple of years and down the track. That doesn't always sit well with finance people, who just see, oh, that could be a potential loss. But they need a longer term vision to say, well, we can't just stay doing what we're doing right now. We actually need to be able to invest in products that will future-proof us. So there's always that need to be ambidextrous, that need to maintain current practices while also looking for future revenue and practices.
Well, and I imagine with Eastman Kodak, you had people, as you said, who were vested in their revenue stream. This new division opens up that can take away from that.
Yeah.
And with probably the revenue was making, why should we even bother?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
that's the I think that's the first sign of failure. There's a great expression by Winston Churchill that says success is not final and failure is not fatal. So you're not going to stay successful forever. And if you have a few hiccups, if you have a few failures, it doesn't matter. You just move on. That's I think that's what's happened to many companies. When you look at, for example, Blockbuster, which is another company that's well known, they went from renting videos. They missed out on the streaming market. Nobody had the vision. I don't know if there's any Blockbusters left. Bookstores are the same thing. They just became complacent. That's why I strongly believe that arrogance is really the first road to your demise. I was a competitive judo fighter for many years, okay? And I always knew that somebody not as good as me can beat me at one point. If I thought I was going to win every match. I always win every match, no matter who I fought with, that person can beat me. And then you end up being smarter about what you do. I think I think it's a problem because people are often afraid.
Yeah.
They're afraid to take the plunge. They're afraid to say, well, I want to do this. They're afraid to perhaps plant ideas to their employers because, what if it doesn't work? It's my job. And I want to
Yeah.
get fired because I started a mess. So they have to be, I think the entrepreneur has to be a risk taker.
Yeah. Yep. Once again, wise words from you, Rudy, and some really interesting observations there. I think one of the things that we need to do is reframe what we refer to as failure. So, the term failure has got so much negative baggage to it, whereas just because something doesn't work the way we expected to or hoped it would, if we can repurpose the learning from that and then maybe just iterate again what we might be working on, but just doing it differently and changing direction and maybe experimenting with things differently. If something doesn't work, that's not the end of the story. That's just the next step in the journey to success.
Well, Thomas Edison is the best example of that. He said,
Exactly.
I didn't fail 1,000 or 10,000 times. I just figured out how many times it didn't work till I finally got to how it worked.
Exactly. It's only failure if you stop at that. Like if it doesn't work and you go, oh, well, that didn't work, let me just go on to my next project. Right? Whereas you go, okay, well, that didn't work. What didn't work about it? How could I have done it differently in order to get a different outcome? Let me try that. And so you keep going. I mean, understanding that there has to become a time where, you might need to cut your losses. But I think people give up too easily. This is why we see these crazy statistics about 80% of businesses going out of business in the first year or two. Just find different ways of doing things. If something doesn't work initially, go around it. Go find what other aspect of it could you have done differently, and then repurpose that failure into learning, which will give you a different outcome at the next iteration. I mean, that's why we call first attempts at things minimum viable products. That's not the end goal. You're just working on something on an interim until you get to the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. So we need to stop thinking about failure as being, the be all and that's it. We've failed, we're done, we've got the banner of failure over our head and that's it. No, we have to move past that and go, well, this was just one way I found out that it didn't work. And that's a great example from Edison. Yes.
Well, I could remember at one point I managed an office in Puerto Rico, and I brought everyone into the office. I brought the secretaries, the clerical people, the salespeople, and I said to them, I want this area to grow because we're probably going to shut it down. And I knew that, but I said, what I want it to grow. And what I said was I chose my words very carefully. I said to them, you are all the face of the company. And whatever you can do to make the company grow will be greatly appreciated and will be greatly appreciated bonus time. I said to them, I want you to think outside the box. I want you to think, each of you think how we can grow, what we can do. Call on whatever relationships you have, because Puerto Rico is a place that relationships are very tight. What happened afterwards that some of the workers were complaining, he wants us to go out and sell. And I said, that's not what I said. I said, we're all part of this company together. We need to grow together. So whatever you can contribute to make it grow, but the people mistook that. That's an attempt. I think we're trying to be entrepreneurial, backfired because everyone thought I wanted them all to be salespeople.
So maybe just the messaging and the words you chose needed to have been slightly adapted. If they
I
were
had to
thinking
call
that,
them back for another meeting and say, I
yeah,
don't want you to go out and sell. I
yeah,
want you to just be innovative in your everyday task. If there are
yes,
things we can do better. And that's what I said before. But I had to repeat it, and then they
Yep.
got it, and then they
Yeah.
calmed down.
Well, this whole area of entrepreneurialism and encouraging people to be intrapreneurs, it's quite a foreign concept to a lot of people. And so it does require some education around it and some explanation around it for people to kind of get their head into what it really means and what they're being asked to do. But I will make this observation, which is that what you did in that conversation that you had with the people who worked in that branch in Puerto Rico, you created the culture. You were creating the culture which gave people permission to be intrapreneurial. And admittedly, it took a little bit of time for them to get their head around what exactly it was that you were asking. But this is one of those fundamental, keys and catalysts to creating an intrapreneurial business or an intrapreneurial organization. It's that the leaders, even though they may not be driving everything themselves personally, what they are doing is that they're creating a culture in which people feel that they've got permission, that they're being encouraged to do things differently, think differently, that it's not just, it wasn't just your job as the person heading up that branch in Puerto Rico to do all of the brilliant thinking and thought leadership about how do we innovate. You were inviting everyone to be part of that journey. And that is what I think is the job of leaders. So they need to become the catalysts rather than the drivers of that approach to innovation and intrapreneurialism. And that's exactly what you did. And it just, you needed to just take a bit of time to explain it to everyone, but
Yes,
it was worth
definitely.
it. It was worth it. Yeah.
Well, and the modern day examples of that are Google, companies like Google that basically reward entrepreneurship, that make an environment so that people can think about things. Um, it's, I mean, people, I think, are extremely creative, and given the opportunity, they will not only meet, but they will exceed whatever expectations you have. And if you have some failures, that's okay. When you look at the story of Abe Lincoln, and he's filed for bankruptcy or insolvency several times, lost several elections, what's his last job? President of the United States. So, and when you finally become successful, nobody's going to remember your failures.
Yes.
Nobody's going to remember your failures. There's an expression in Spanish, I'll translate to English. It says that success has many fathers, failures only has one,
Yeah.
But
I understand. Yep. The point that you just made too about organizations being populated with people who have great ideas and who are capable of so much that's not being liberated or harnessed by the organization. That's a really, really good point. I read a blog post a while ago by Professor Gary Hamel. He's professor at London Business School, and he's written the book called Humanocracy, which is just brilliant. And anyone listening, I would strongly recommend that you have a look at that book. He did the calculations to say that there was something like $9 trillion worth of productivity that was being lost just in OCED countries,
mhm.
OEDC countries alone. So point being that there was $9 trillion worth of lost productivity that's just being trapped and tied up inside bureaucratic structures. And people are there with wonderful ideas that are not being liberated, that are not being accessed, that are not going into the world and creating value because they're trapped in outdated organizational procedures and processes and things that say you can't talk to that person because this is your job over here and they're 3 steps removed from you, and okay, you want to do something, let's send it up the line through all of the layers of communication and come back down again, and meanwhile the world's moved on. So it's very much about leaders being prepared to listen to those ideas and act on them much more quickly rather than
Sure.
saying, we've got our processes and you can't step outside of them.
Because the monetary success is easily quantifiable. For example, the PlayStation example is quantifiable. The fitness app that you mentioned in your book, that's quantifiable. The Silicon Valley, the fitness app, the what's it called? The Vivonic. Um, I mean, they're all quantifiable. That's the beauty of it, that you can actually, I think, match dollar for dollar the success of innovation by entrepreneurs.
It's true. Um, I've got two things to say to that. Let me just pick up on that point. Firstly, sometimes because I've worked a lot in government departments and doing intrapreneurialism, liberating entrepreneurialism in a government department, some of the projects that people have progressed have been things like transforming the culture of the team. You know, it hasn't necessarily been about an additional revenue stream. And so I always encourage people to see if they can somehow quantify the impact of their project, their entrepreneurial project. And I've had people say to me, I don't actually think I can, because my project's very intangible. My project's about improving the culture of our team, liberating their talent. And I'll go, okay, now if you've improved the culture of your team and you're creating an environment where people are energized and happy to come to work and excited about bringing their ideas with them, what kind of downstream benefits could there be to that? Maybe there's less sick days. Maybe there's less presenteeism. People are bringing ideas that are solving problems that you can quantify. So I then push them to think about, well, how, if people are taking even one less sick day a year, what does that translate into in terms of benefit to the organization? If people are transforming things in a way that serves a customer better, even if it's only in a small way, what value can you put some sort of value on that, and then can you translate that into a dollar value? So I think even things that look like they're not quantifiable often are. But there are also those intangibles, Rudy, that come from the benefits of being entrepreneurial, and it is literally about the happiness factor. The person who gets that buzz of dopamine when they solve a problem. That's also an outcome of entrepreneurialism, but that's much harder to quantify. But I agree that it is a good idea to make, if possible, the invisible visible and put some sort of quantifiable value on the work that people are doing through their entrepreneurial initiatives.
I think it's easy in some cases and not so easy in others. But if you have a better and happier workforce, let's say, because they are allowed to develop, you could get more productivity from them. And you found ways for shortcuts that allows them to be more efficient, say in the government sector. They can service the population even more. In the private corporate world, saving process is also saving costs, because in a number of corporate worlds, some divisions are not profit centers. But when you save costs by inventing new systems, um, being entrepreneurial, there's still an effect to that. Can you tell us? I mean, we can go on for hours speaking, Dr. Shaw, but I want you to tell us about the summit that's coming up, how people can participate. Tell us some more about your book. By the way, it was a great read. It's one of the best books I've read in a long, long time. It just wasn't. It's an incredible book, and I encourage everyone to buy it and to read it, because you will not go wrong.
Oh, thank you so much, Rudy. You're you're very complimentary, and I appreciate your kind words. And thank you so much for also asking me to talk about the Global Intrapreneurs Summit and award ceremony, because I'm really excited about this. This is an opportunity to expand the global conversation around this really important topic, which really is engaging a lot of people. And there are some wonderful players in this field already who've been doing entrepreneurialism for many years, and the work they do is just phenomenal. What we wanted to do with the summit was to expand the conversation beyond the corporate or even the business world. And so I thought, we're really coming into a time when it's going to serve everyone, no matter what context they're in. it's going to serve them well to be an intrapreneur. And so it challenged me to think about, do we have teenage intrapreneurs? Do we have young people who are intrapreneuring, so to speak, within their families? How are they coming up with ideas to make things better for their family? Are there young people who are entrepreneuring within their school communities or their sporting clubs or their church youth groups or, other contexts where their enterprising spirit and their desire to solve problems is being demonstrated even before they go into the workplace? And so what we're doing with the summit is we've got so many different contexts that we're talking about in relation to entrepreneurialism. And so we've got the corporate context and we've got higher education, but we're also talking to the Mother of the Year from the UK, so Sabrina Ben Salmi, who has raised 5 children in ages from 8 to 21 as we speak now, who are all successful entrepreneurs in various ways. And so I wanted to talk to her about how do you raise preneurs, young people who will go on to either starting their own business, or even if they go on to having a job where they work for someone else, they bring that entrepreneurial spirit with them to be intrapreneurs as well as entrepreneurs. And so she's going to be talking to us about that. I'm going to be talking to some young people, some teenagers who are successful entrepreneurs while they're still at school. And as I've been sort of just speaking with them and getting to know them in the lead up to the summit, I've asked them the question, are you also planning, even though you've got a successful business, are you also planning after school to go to university, still get a qualification as a lawyer or an accountant or a doctor or, whatever? And they go, yeah, we're going to do that. So the chances are that they will also be employees, so they can be intrapreneurs while simultaneously running businesses outside of their day job, so to speak. So they're going to be entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs simultaneously. I think this is a very interesting world we're moving into. We're going to see more of that as we go forward. So I wanted to start capturing that thinking in this space and expand the conversation about entrepreneurialism into areas that it hasn't as yet really been talked about. So that was the purpose of the summit. We're also offering outstanding intrapreneurs awards to people in multiple sectors. So we're inviting people to nominate for the Outstanding Intrapreneur Award from education, from corporate, of course, from small to medium-sized businesses, and also the not-for-profit area and government, because we have entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs in all of those areas. So we're inviting people to come and get recognized for that, because I want to celebrate the fantastic work that intrapreneurs do in all sectors all around the world, and we're giving multiple awards in each of those categories. So anyone is listening to this on your wonderful YouTube channel, and they're thinking to themselves, after hearing this conversation, Rudy, they're thinking to themselves, I never thought of myself as an intrapreneur. I'd never even heard that term before, but I think I'm an intrapreneur. Well, come and nominate at www.globalentrepreneurssummit.com and choose the category that would be suitable for you and put in a nomination.
The idea you gave me with this, Dr. Shaw, is this would be great for inner city kids. There are a number of there's a program called Communities in Schools that target children who are high risk of dropping out from school and prepare them towards a career and a path towards college. I think this would be an outstanding program for them.
It's interesting that you raise that, because in fact I do think that the 12 skills that I talk about in my book is in fact the next professional skill set. It's what we might refer to as the transferable skill set, the generic skill set that people will be able to take into every context in which they work, and take with them wherever they go. And in some ways, it's also the skill set that will help young people to be successful in whatever area they choose. And in fact, there is a wonderful young man here in Brisbane, where in my hometown, called Taj Prabari, who was the Innovator of the Year back in 2014, and he's all of 21 now, and has this wonderful business helping to upskill at-risk teenagers in these very skills that will help to make them successful in their adult life. So what you say about this being a concept that's really relevant to inner city kids or other groups that you might have had in mind just then is really relevant. It's very relevant.
Well, I am putting the link below to Global Entrepreneurial Summit.com, so anyone looking at this video can see it and click a link onto it.
Okay.
Dr.
Thank
Shaw,
you.
thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Again, if you like this channel, you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Shaw, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. There'll be other great interviews to follow, but I have to tell you, Dr. Shaw, you are a hard act to follow after this. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Dr. Shaw. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And thanks, everyone out there in YouTube land.
Thank